Good morning, everyone. I'm Stas Margaronis, president of the Propeller Club of Northern California, and we are today welcoming Lars Jensen with VESPUCCI Maritime, who is going to be providing us with his Global Container Trade Review. Before we get started, I would like everybody to mute themselves so that we don't get any interference. And I'm going to be doing introductions, so if you can turn on your video so we can see each other, that would also be nice. And we have a very, I think, very timely presentation from Lars about many things that we are concerned about. Our trade with the Far East, the disruptions caused by COVID in China, the impact of the recession, the downturn, of course, that we're all faced. Port of Oakland issued a press release today indicating that their volumes are down. I see Brian Brandes. We'll chat with him in a second. We also have some issues that we're concerned about with IMO and emissions, methanol fuel, and I will be chatting with Lars a little bit later about that. But to begin with, I would like to start with my introductions, and as I always do, I introduce Todd Crawshaw, RIT. Todd, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Todd Crawshaw, Crawshaw Design. We provide integrated brand marketing for print and web, and premier web hosting and IT support.
Very good. Thank you very much. And Andrew Wong, you are up first. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, everybody. Andrew Huang, Port of Oakland, Manager of Business Development and International Marketing. Happy New Year, everyone. Great to see everyone again.
Andrew, before you leave, quick question. There's a lot of people who are saying that once the COVID problem recedes from China, that China's going to bounce back and everything's going to be just like it was before. Is that your belief?
Well, I do think, this is just me and only me. I'm thinking that our depressed volumes will last at least until the end of the first quarter, and being optimistic as I always am. I'm hoping that by June, we'll have a normal back to school shipping season like we've had in the past. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. But I do think that as they're getting over all these initial onslaught of cases and people get better, we'll start to see some stabilization of production and everything else going on.
Thank you, Andrew. And Brian Brandes. Good morning, Brian.
Morning, Brian Brandes, the Director of Maritime for the Port of Oakland. Thanks for having me, Stas.
Brian, quick question. What is your projection for 2023?
Yeah, no, I along Andy's line of thinking, I think we're definitely gonna have a slower first quarter. I'm a little slightly less optimistic. I think we're gonna, the second quarter will start off, slow as well, and then I think we'll end up volume picking up third and fourth quarter.
Very good, Brian. Thank you very much. Captain Ann McIntyre. Good morning.
Good morning. Ann McIntyre, Business Director for the San Francisco Bar Pilots, and happy to be included as a new board member for the Propeller Club. So good to see everybody.
We welcome you, Ann, and we will see you tomorrow at the board meeting.
Yes.
Thank you very much. John Carlier, Captain John, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. Thanks for having me. John Carlier, the port agent for the San Francisco Bar Pilots.
Thank you very much, Captain John. Mr. Charles Labiton, good morning.
Morning, Stas. Charles Labiton, Maritime Trade, Port of San Francisco. Glad to be here. We don't do any containers, but always happy to hear how the container trade is coming along. Thanks.
Charles, thank you very much, and I'll see you at the board meeting tomorrow. Dan Roach. Dan, good morning.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Dan Roach, I'm a route analyst with Storm Geo. So provide routes to captains at sea to the cross safely and efficiently.
Very good. Thank you very much. Darren Shems. Darren, good morning.
Also a route analyst for Storm Geo, and I am the lead internal auditor for the company as well. Thank you.
Darren, quick question. How is the weather impacting Pacific shipping, and are you busy?
Well, anytime in the winter, you know, it gets going. So winter North Atlantic's probably a little bit more problematic for us at the moment, but you know, it ebbs and flows. But yeah, we're getting through it okay. It's certainly not one of the worst winters of recent memory. Tony might remember some from several years back, but I'll never forget. I think it was 2013 was one of the worst I can remember. But yeah, winter North Atlantic's no joke.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Daniel Serrato. Daniel, good morning.
Daniel Serrato. I'm a business development executive for PCC Logistics. We're a service provider along the West Coast with locations in LA, Oakland, and Seattle. Thank you for having me, Stas.
Daniel, welcome. And what is your projection for 2023?
It really just goes on the state of the ports. From what we've seen, we've been a little slow. Good to hear from Andy. Good to hear from Brian. We're hanging on. As far as we can see right now, our facilities aren't completely full, but we are still moving cargo. Really just gonna hang on until that June influx comes in, really.
Very good. Daniel, thank you very much. Dennis Dysinger. Dennis, good morning.
Hey, Stas, good seeing you last week. Dennis Dysinger with Dysinger Maritime and Logistics Management. I left Mare Island last year and kind of hung out my own shingle and kind of taking phone calls. So it's kind of an interesting time out there in the ship repair business.
Very good. And I saw the GAO report is warning that our naval shipyards are not up to par and need to be doing a lot more. I'm sure you saw that.
Correct, Amundo. Yes, there's a lot of discussion about that, and people are circling the wagons out there.
Very good. Dennis, thank you very much. Greg Feeney, board member Greg Feeney, good morning.
Good morning, Stas and everyone. As Daniel said, over at PCC, my neighbor, it's been quiet here the first few weeks in January. So we're hoping it turns on as you know exports get stronger for our hay market, and then it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenging year, but you know we're ready to take it on. So thanks for the support from everyone.
Very good. Thank you very much. Kevin Bulger.
Yes, I'm Kevin Bulger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Carey Apex, a division of Carey Logistics.
Thank you very much. Kim Arrive. Good morning, Kim. Kim, are you there?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, I'm retired Pacific Maritime Association Director of Training. Trained all those longshoremen up and down the coast and in Hawaii. And I'm just enjoying my retirement.
Very good. Good to see you again, Kim, and you take care. And how is our Red Oak Victory doing?
Well, they're hanging in there. You know, it's the sole remaining victory that helped us win World War II, and we're hanging in there, open for visitors, and it's good to see the old times on the ship.
Very good, Kim. Thank you very much. Kevin Policarpo. Kevin, good morning.
Morning, boss. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Policarpo. I I'm an assistant to Mr. Margaronis for research related to maritime and some other subjects.
And some of the other subjects have a lot to do with maritime, and actually you're working on a report on shipbuilding. So it's going to be an interesting first quarter for us. Kevin, thank you very much. Matthew Lafiandra, good morning.
Good morning, Stas, and good morning to everybody else. Very happy to be here. I'm CEO of Ocean Solutions. We're a derivatives broker for forward freight agreements in particular. So we do a lot with the tanker and dry bulk markets. Coming off a very strong 2022, and proud to report I recently hired 2 Cal Maritime graduates to enter into our training program. So.
Oh, that's very good news. And I am sure that they're very good. They're very happy too.
Yeah, very excited to have them. Yeah.
And Matthew, are you still up in Santa Rosa?
I am indeed, neighbor.
Okay. Well, we need to get together.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Matthew, thank you very much. I see somebody with a moniker of MBAC.
Yes, good morning. Michael Backey, route analyst, manager for Storm Geo and container business unit manager.
Very good. Welcome. Mr. Peter Olney, a retired IOWU member. Mr. Olney, good morning.
Morning, Stas. Thanks for these great educationals. I'm Peter Olney, retired organizing director of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. And in retirement, I've been working with a national network of Amazon workers attempting to organize the 800,000 Amazon warehouse workers.
So, Peter, if you have any information about that, the American Journal of Transportation covers all sides of the argument. Please keep us in mind.
Will do, Stas. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Robert Wilkins, good morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Wilkins. I'm the director of the International Maritime Center and Seafarers Ministry of the Golden Gate, getting on ships, checking on our seafarers. Good to be here.
Good. And you're making a presentation to the Propeller Club board tomorrow morning.
That is true.
So welcome, Robert, and we'll see you tomorrow.
See ya.
Thank you. Mr. Ronald Brown, good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Stas. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I got my headphones on this morning, so I'm hoping they're coming through loud and clear. Ron Brown with the Port of Oakland. And if Stas had asked me the question about what my projection is for 2023, my answer would be we are aggressively trying to recover our ag cargo that went to the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. So my job this year is to try to recover that cargo that left Oakland, that ag cargo, and bring it back to Oakland.
And that's a big priority for us, Ron. And hopefully we will have good fortune in 2023. And any insights you can provide us tomorrow at the board meeting, we'd be very appreciative.
I'll see you there.
Thank you very much. Susan Ransom, my goodness, we are fortunate. Good morning, Susan.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Susan Ransom, Client Relations Manager at SSA and board member of the PCNC. I will be there tomorrow, although a little late. We are the largest stevedoring terminal in Oakland, and projections kind of the same what everyone's saying. You know, our volumes here at the terminal are low. There are no reason whatsoever someone should not be picking up their container. And we are looking to some new services that are going to be starting up here pretty soon, but projections probably after first quarter, we should see some increase in volume. And Ron, I love that you're going after the ag because we want it to come through SSA.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. John Lee, Mr. Lee, good morning.
Good morning. I am the president of SW Logistics. I'm a freight forwarder and a custom broker in Oakland. I am newly elected as the president of Custom Brokers and Forwarders Association of Northern California.
And John, when you and I were chatting at the Customs Chain of Command last week, you pointed out that several countries are having debt issues in Asia. Do you think that that's going to be impacting trade in 2023?
So several countries in the global south, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, has applied for and is gotten IMF loans because their foreign exchange has been spent on buying fuel and foodstuffs. If you can imagine a country like Bangladesh, who mainly makes garments for Europe and the United States, their entire production of that and the income of that was not enough to pay for the fuel and food. So, and that is the same for these other countries. When China comes back from zero COVID this year, you guys have kind of thought maybe second quarter or third quarter, oil prices will certainly go back up again, and we may see difficulties in payments for our trade partners, between our trade partners from those countries.
Very good. John, thank you very much, and congratulations on your election to CB Fang, and we hope to be seeing a lot more of you.
Thank you.
Teresa Neff. Teresa, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm Teresa Neff, sales manager at GSE Logistics, headquartered here in Oakland.
Very good. Teresa, welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tony Petronio. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. Good morning, everybody. Tony Petronio, general manager of ship routing operations with Storm Geo.
Thank you very much. And I imagine, like your colleague, the weather is keeping you guys busy.
Definitely. Although here in California, we'll see a nice break from the rain, which I never thought I would say it, but we need it.
Thank you very much, Tony. David Thornburg, former president of the Propeller Club of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Good morning, my friend.
Good morning. Good morning. Great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. And how is your container project working?
Really good. Look, good to see Lars again as well. But yeah, the containers are on the way to the West Coast, and we'll start deploying them very soon. If you go to genflat.com, you'll see all the details.
If you could send me any release that you have about that, maybe we could get something in AJOT.
Would love to. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Mr. John Byrne, good morning. Mr. Byrne, are you there? Let me then go on to our board member, Susan Sullivan. Susan, good morning. Susan, I can't hear you. Okay. Todd, can you, are we having a problem? Can you hear?
I don't know. I'm not sure. John just come in. So
okay.
Maybe he's trying to get his audio going. I'm not sure.
John, are you there? Susan? Okay. We have a 415 592 76394. Who is that? All right. If we don't have an identification on a phone number, Todd, I think we need to ask them to leave because I don't know who that is, and I don't want somebody we don't know.
Either reassign yourself. You can go in and change your put your name in.
Okay. Would you ask them, send them a message to do that? And have I introduced everybody else?
I think you got everybody. Did you
That's
get
me,
Kevin
Stas.
Bolger?
Oh, Clay, good morning. Clay Sandage.
Hello, everybody. Clay Sandage. I'm a senior project development associate at P2S. And I also, and P2S is a mechanical, electrical, plumbing design firm. Also represent Aris Technologies, which is an emissions capture barge-based technology. And we anticipate deploying an emissions capture barge in Oakland later this year. So look forward to working with you guys.
And how is the project going in Southern California?
We're wrapping up our demonstration hours with CARB under our CARB approved test plan in San Pedro Bay now. We've got about 40 hours to go and anticipate having an executive order on that barge unit probably in March.
Very good. Thank you very much, Clay. And I will be down at Mario's State of the Port next week, and actually at Gene's on Thursday. So hope to see you then. Susan and John, are either of you still there? Okay, and I see a 925 area code. Is that person there? Okay, then we will go on to our main event, which is Lars Jensen, who founded VESPUCCI Maritime. And Lars has been a feature of ours the last couple of years. He is a fountain of information and wisdom on the container industry. He has 20 years of experience from inside and outside the container industry. He worked for Maersk Lines and Maersk Logistics. 2 years has been a CEO of a purely online container carrier. And he is one of the experts on what is going on in the container business. He's also the author of at least one book that I know of. And Lars, thank you very much for being with us. And we have a very different container trade picture in 2023 than we did in 2022.
Indeed, we do. It's been a complete 180 compared to where we were a year ago. But if you'll allow me, Stas, I've prepared a few slides just to set the stage and give people a flavor for where the market is and just how fast everything has come. Let's just call it what it is, unraveled. So if we look at, that was not the start. Excuse me for a second. There we go. The reason I don't say the demand is collapsing now is because this has really been ongoing since September. And I don't use the word collapse here lightly. I mean, we all know container markets, they go up, they go down, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. But if we start to take a look at the numbers, this is what we're looking at from a global perspective to start with. And mind you, what I've taken to do as a standard is I measure global demand not in TEU, so not in numbers of containers, but in TEU miles. We have to take the distance into account because that matches up with the capacity we need in terms of vessels. Frankly, I've never understood why when tankers and bulkers all use ton miles, why we never use TEU miles in container shipping. But this is what it looks like in TEU miles. And as you can see, basically year-on-year growth rates, they drop off a cliff in September. This is data measured at time of loading. So the newest data here is for the full month of November, which actually covers cargo, which is then delivered December and sometimes a bit into January, depending on trade lanes here. And we are basically down almost 14% on global demand year on year. There's a caveat here because the market has been very unstable ever since we were hit by the pandemic. So a consideration here could be, is this purely an artifact? Is this very, very low growth rate for global demand simply because we are comparing to last year that might be particularly strong? That could be a consideration. So one thing that's worthwhile doing is comparing not year on year, but comparing to what was global demand in 2019 before the pandemic. So how much have we actually grown? And this is what you get. This is every month of 2022. What did global demand do versus the same month in 2019? And here again, you can see we're basically reaching back to pandemic levels over summer, and things drop off a cliff from September. We are still much below the demand levels that we had pre-pandemic. We're actually also below 2018 levels. So demand collapse is really the right word for what is going on out there right now. And it's not that the collapse is the same everywhere. If I just go one slide back, you say minus 14% down year on year. That is very, very bad. But there are trades that are even worse off. And the trades that are worse off tends to be the very long trades. So if you look at the average sailing distance of a container in the world, it has been steadily declining and also dropping off a cliff. This is important when you look at supply and demand balance, because if the average distance is shortening, you need fewer vessels to move the same amount of cargo. That worsens the global supply and demand balance. And when I say long trades, it's the Asia-Europe trades and it's the Trans-Pacific trades that are predominantly the ones that really have been dropping off a cliff here. If you look at the Asia-Europe trade, blue line here is year on year, orange line is versus 2019. And you can see when this was worst in October, the Asia-Europe trade was down 26% year on year. And when it's worst in September, we're down 20% versus pre-pandemic. We are still in November down 20% year on year. We are still below pre-pandemic levels, but don't be fooled by the strong orange line. It's because the markets were weakening towards the end of 2019. Same thing if you look at the Pacific. This is Asia to North America, so not just US, it's also Canada and Mexico in there. Year on year, this just gets worse and worse. In November, we are down to about minus 27% on volumes inbound from Asia to North America. We are still hovering roughly at around the 2019 level, which is of course better than Asia-Europe. But mind you, we started out being up to 50% above pre-pandemic levels. This was the massive concern that we saw in the US in the wake of the pandemic, where everybody was stuck at home buying everything in sight on their computers that drove this boom. That boom is well and truly over. All of that boom is gone. We are back to pre-pandemic levels, and year on year decline that is probably some of the worst that we have ever seen. If you look underneath the numbers, the core driver of this massive decline is very simple. It's an inventory correction. Inventory corrections always hit container volumes hard. That also means that this level of decline is likely going to continue until all the importers have run down their inventories to more satisfactory levels. This is likely to happen sometime during Q1, but we are not there yet. We are not seeing a peak coming up to Chinese New Year. I mean, Chinese New Year is next Sunday, and there has not been a shimmer of much of a peak in relation to that. So this is likely going to be the picture for most of Q1. That's on the demand side. So demand is down. What if we flip the switch and look on the capacity side? The core there is still reliability, because that's what soaks up capacity. You can see how reliability globally dropped off a cliff at the onset of the pandemic. You can also see how it reached a bottom in January last year, where less than 30% of vessels globally arrived on time. We're now up to 57% on-time performance, which is of course still not good, but a substantial improvement over 2022. And if you look at the delay of the vessels, that also peaked in January at 8 days on average for the late vessels. We're now down below 5 days. Again, this is global average. Keep in mind, there are trades that were worst off. One of the very, very worst trades was the Trans-Pacific into the US West Coast. When that was at its worst in January last year, less than 10% of vessels arrived on time. And the ones that were late were on average 17 days late. That has also improved massively over 2022. We started out a year ago when we had up to about 100 vessels backed up off the California coastline, down to a state of affairs where basically we have 0 now. So this has been a normalization process. Those of you who have seen me here before will have seen the next graph as well, where I say fine, vessels that are waiting are effectively vessels where the capacity is removed. So we can calculate how much of the global fleet is unavailable due to delays. And this is what you get. A year ago, a full 14% of the global container vessel fleet was unavailable due to all these massive delays. We are now down below 6%. Still bad. The baseline is 2%. That's under normal circumstances. But with this level of improvement, if this continues, and it has for 12 months, by the end of Q1, we'll be back to full normal operational capabilities. When we get to the end of Q1, we get basically all the capacity back into the market, which from an operational perspective is of course great, but the timing in terms of supply and demand balance is extremely unfortunate, because this means we are at a period now where, as we first saw, demand is collapsing completely, and at the same time, we are injecting massive amounts of capacity back into the market, a market that clearly does not need capacity. That's the challenge. And that, of course, impacts freight rates. If we take the spot rates first, if you look at Asia, Europe on the left-hand side, and the Pacific, in this case, into the US West Coast on the right-hand side, the development has been a massive roller coaster ride. On Asia, Europe, we've gone from $14,000 to less than $2,000 per 40-footer, according to the indices. On the Pacific, we've gone from 11,000 down to 2,000, according to the indices. This is the World Container Index. There are different indices. They all show more or less the same trends. If you look at the absolutely sharpest rates out there in the market, there are now spot rates that are now clearly below pre-pandemic levels, And this is in a market where the carrier's unit costs are something like 30 to 40% higher than before the pandemic. So this has gone from absolute boom to absolute bust for the carriers. The transatlantic right now appears to be the odd one out. They strengthened and kept strong during 2022. This was not demand driven, this was capacity driven, and it's actually a consequence of the congestion off the US West Coast. The massive congestion in the US West Coast at the end of 21 led a lot of shippers to redirect the supply chain to move as much cargo as they could over to the US East Coast instead. The predictable effect was, of course, massive congestion in US East Coast ports. That ended up delaying the transatlantic vessels. So suddenly the transatlantic vessels were stuck in interminable queues. This reduced capacity on the transatlantic, strengthening the freight rates. Last few weeks, transatlantic spot rates have begun to come down. The carriers' plans right now, if you look at their schedules, is a 30% capacity injection into the transatlantic. And by the way, the latest demand numbers show Atlantic being down 10% on demand. So very likely in the coming weeks, you're going to see the transatlantic do exactly the same roller coaster ride as you see here on Asia, Europe, and on Pacific. This was a transient effect on the transatlantic. That effect is gone. But of course, that was an artifact on the congestion on the US East Coast. There is an interesting element to consider here, because the reason a lot of cargo moved away from the West Coast to the East Coast was to avoid the congestion on the West Coast. Now that congestion is gone, but the cargo has not come back to the West Coast. It's also very clear why. The concern here is, as long as there is no new agreement between the PMA and the ILWU, most shippers would not want to move their cargo back to the West Coast, only to be held hostage by potential labor action. So until that new union agreement is signed, it is unlikely that these volumes will come back to the West Coast. And that, of course, means that some of the congestion issues on the US East Coast will take a tad longer to get resolved. That was the spot rates. The only true index that really is global is the one from Container Trade Statistics. It's not measured in dollars, it's purely an index. It includes all trade lanes in the world. It includes all types of cargo, spot, short-term contracts, long-term contracts, everything. Tends to act with a couple of months of lag time compared to the spot rates. But you can also see how that one is declining rapidly. And what's important here, the pace of decline is even faster than the pace of increase we saw back when the rates were going up. So rate levels are coming down. They're coming down hard. They're coming down fast. you have seen for months now how there has been renegotiation of existing contracts, not surprisingly. Because if you look at what has happened to spot versus contract, these are some of the latest data from Norwegian provider Senita. Let's just focus in on the first one here, Far East to US West Coast. The blue line, that is where the contract rates were by the end of 21 versus the end of 22, just a couple of weeks ago. The orange line is where the spot market was according to Senita data. So we started out a year ago with a spot market $3,000 above contract, to a market now where spot rates are $4,000 below contract. And to absolutely no surprise to anyone, nobody wants to pay $4,000 more than spot. That just doesn't fly. So you had a lot of contracts that have been renegotiated over the last couple of months. Given the sharp decline in demand, a lot of the carriers have been quite amenable to changing rates in the contracts. In some cases, carriers have gone proactively to the customers and say, shouldn't we lower your rates in the contracts simply to try to hang on to the volume? This has been even more severe, as you can see in Far East North Europe, where the difference between spot and contract has been even worse than what you've seen on any of the Pacific trades. I've included this one because this sets the tone for the next couple of years, 23 and 24. This is the size of the order book of all the major global alliance carriers. And you can see the disparity here. MSC is going to grow phenomenally, and so is COSCO. Maersk and Yang Ming has got basically no order books at all. So you're going to see a competitive game unfold between the carriers, where some carriers are going to be very aggressive for growth. They need volume to live up to all these new vessels. Other carriers are not interested in growth at all. They want to focus on selling logistics products or increasing their unit profitability. This is going to ramp up the pressure between the carriers. This pressure is already manifesting itself, because you could ask, at least rhetorically, the question, why are the carriers so poor in pulling capacity out now when they were so good at it in 2020? Remember, in 2020, when demand collapsed, carriers pulled out capacity rapidly and efficiently and prevented a rate collapse. But back then, all the carriers had the same interests. They had to do it to stay alive. Now, the carriers no longer have aligned interests. The competitive pressure is much larger. So the alliances are still pulling capacity. Absolutely they are, but they're just not as efficient at doing it as they were back in 2020. And hence this massive rate collapse that we have seen. So before I hand it over to Stas for us to have a chat, let me just highlight a few things that for me is key to watch out for here in 23. The US West Coast labor contract negotiations, they're absolutely key. And again, that's also key why volume is not yet coming back to the US West Coast. And just to put this in context, a decade ago, you had an imbalance of 1.5 to 1. So for every 1.5 container that was handled on the West Coast, only one was on the East Coast. The latest data from Port Stats, that's again November data, shows there are now more containers being handled on the East Coast than the West Coast. This is a very dramatic shift. Some of that cargo is going to come back to the West Coast, but not until this contract is in place. There's right now increasing congestion challenges in China. China chose to go from 0 COVID to 100% COVID in a heartbeat. And that, of course, creates all sorts of disruptions over there, both in production, but also in the availability of labor in ports and in logistics infrastructure. It's right now unclear how that's going to unfold. There are increasingly cases of shippers pushing back on detention and demurrage in North America. This is a consequence of the new OSRA that made it easier to challenge detention and demurrage practices. Shippers are clearly using this. There's already been a few rulings going against the carriers. I expect to see a lot more of that happening over 2023. Also, because of this rapid downturn in the spot rates and also contract rates, we should expect a dramatic worsening in the carriers' financial performance. I will not be surprised to see carriers come out and readjust their profit estimates for 2023 downwards. I would not be surprised in a negative scenario that carriers would actually be loss-making in 2023. And everybody should brace themselves for more blank sailings. The carriers have blanked a lot of sailings the last few months, but as we can see on the spot rate development, far from enough. So we should expect even more disruption and more blank sailings. The final thing I then want to add on this one is, I mean, Stas was asking me this just before we logged on here, in terms of when does this end? When does the market come back? And the way I see it is there are two different scenarios out there, and there's not a soul on earth right now that can tell which one's right. One scenario, that's the happy optimistic one. The happy and optimistic one is this is only an inventory correction. The global recession we're likely in now is short and shallow. The Russia war ends, we get inflation under control, consumers get happy and optimistic. If that is the case, then this will likely pick up over summer. This means we're going to see a surge of cargo in the normal peak season over summer, and the markets will rectify themselves. That's the optimistic scenario. Then there's a pessimistic scenario, which is, at least from my perspective, somewhat easier to swallow, because that's a scenario where the Russia war does not end anytime soon. It takes a lot longer to get inflation under control. The current recession might be deeper and longer than we expect. It will take longer for consumer sentiment to come back. In that case, this boom in cargo that we always get after an inventory correction is not going to happen until the lead up to Chinese New Year 2024, so 12 months from now. So those are the two scenarios here. With that, at least in setting the stage, over to you, Stas.
Lars, thank you very much for this really succinct, concise analysis. I think all of us benefit from this kind of perspective that you provide us. I would like to start out with one question that you and I talked about earlier, which is the IMO has a new carbon intensity indicator, and the carriers are quite upset about this, and some of them are saying it's unfair. Is it unfair? And also, what is going? So, is there more smoke than real truth here? I mean, do we have a problem or not?
I'm not sure we have a problem. I would rather look at that debacle in a slightly different fashion. If you are going to develop a measure, an index, in this case, the CII, that is going to measure, let's call it what it is, environmental performance of merchant ships. We got 80,000 merchant vessels in the world, container vessels, cruise ships, tankers, bulkers, tugboats, whatever have you. And you have one measure to cover them all. It is not going to be physically possible to create a measure that makes everybody happy. You will always be able to find someone who say, well, these particular ships or these particular sizes, they are unfairly treated. I don't think, I mean, you're trying to square the circle here. It's just not going to happen. No matter what measure you come up with, you can always poke holes in it. There was also a lot of efforts going on in 2019 to poke holes in IMO 2020 and the low sulfur rules for being unfair. And they were not changed. And I don't think this is going to be changed either. One thing you didn't ask, if you'll allow me to segue into that, is there's a lot of focus on IMO 2023, but I don't think there's enough focus on the emissions trading scheme in the EU that they have agreed. I mean, the ETS in Europe, let's call it what it is. It's a carbon tax, because that's what it is. And of course, it only covers EU, but it impacts the rest of the world too. It's going to go into effect here from 24 in terms of money coming on the table. It's going to be gradually phased in, but here's the rub. If you move a ship between two EU ports, you basically pay for the emissions of that whole journey. That makes sense. But what if one of those ports is a non-EU port? Well, if it's from a non-EU port to an EU port or vice versa, you need to pay for 50% of the emissions of that journey. This is where the fun part comes in. Let's say I have a nice rapid service from Shanghai directly into Rotterdam. That's a very, very long journey to pay a carbon tax on. Why don't I stop over in the Red Sea in Jeddah, for example? That way I cut 2/3 of the journey off. I only have to pay from Jeddah upwards, but it gets even more fun. There is this tiny country in the EU, or rather that decided not to be in the EU anymore, called the Great Britain. They are not part of this deal. So technically, as it is right now, a service that goes, let's say, direct from New York to Rotterdam. If I was a carrier, I would make a first port call in Felixstowe first before I go to Rotterdam. Because why would I want to pay carbon tax from New York to Rotterdam when I can settle for paying from Felixstowe to Rotterdam. So if this goes through the way it is right now, this is going to have some ramifications on the carriers' networks on how Europe is serviced to the rest of the world. If I was a carrier, I would go to great lengths to try to insert ports of call as close to the EU as possible before going all the way in. That would be great for some ports that get better connected, but other ports, shippers might simply find their transit times being 1 or 2 days longer than what they're used to because of this.
But regardless, there will be pressure to reduce the carbon emissions, won't there?
Absolutely. There'll be pressure because that will reduce their costs. But what this will also mean, that will mean the carriers will, of course, try to pass this one through. So rest assured, when you get to 2024, you will see all the carriers introduce some sort of carbon surcharge called a BAF ETS or a CO2 surcharge or whatever creative names they can give to them. But it's going to be just like the BAF. Every carrier is going to have an ETS surcharge. And even though they all have to pay the same, these surcharges will all be different. It would appear logical that if the carriers have to pay the same emissions taxes, that they should have the same formula. But that would be illegal, just like with the bunker surcharge. Under EU legislation, the carriers are not allowed to align their surcharges. That would be illegal collusion. So you're going to see a new surcharge being introduced from 2024 for exactly the same thing, but it's going to be different across all the carriers, creating a lot of confusion for the shippers, I'm sure.
And one last question, and I'm going over to our audience. There was a change in leadership at Maersk, and my question is, what does that mean in terms of which of the direction the company is moving in?
Yeah, I mean, I take two things away from the change at Maersk. First, that Vincent Clerc was appointed as new CEO. I see that as a complete reaffirmation that they absolutely do want to stick with the current strategy. I mean, Vincent Clerc has been just as instrumental for the strategy as Søren Skou was. So this is a very, very clear signal from the board. We don't want to change the strategy one tiny little bit. We definitely want it implemented. The second thing I take away from it is when the new executive leadership board was then appointed, so basically all of Vincent Clerc's trusted people, that was expanded to 15 people. And that is because you took all the regional directors up into senior management. I see that pointing at something else. That's a recognition that the crisis the industry is in right now because of the demand collapse, that means executing the business is going to be absolutely vital in the short term, and moving the regional directors who are responsible for the day-to-day execution up into senior management also emphasizes, yes, we're going to stick with the strategy, but there's an even larger focus on operational execution in the here and now.
Very good. Okay, I have a question from Ron Brown. Says, Lars, what impact will central bank decisions have on demand, currency, exchange impacts on international cargo? John Lee mentioned energy impacts on some Asian countries. That too impacts garment productions.
Yeah, I would turn it around and say the key driver here is, again, Europe and North America to a large degree, and the willingness and ability of the consumers to spend money. The challenges here are, as long as you are having high inflation and high interest rates, that is sapping a lot of the buying power. Both obviously from just inflation taking away your money, but higher interest rates also make it more difficult to mortgage and finance your homes. That also takes away even more buying power. Of course, increasing fuel prices, even more so. So the driving force here I see very much as lying in Europe and in North America. And true, they have issues out in, for example, as we heard earlier, in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. But the problem is to a large degree here that the consumers are not buying. That doesn't change no matter what you do in Bangladesh. And it's the same thing, actually, it was brought up earlier in this call. When China gets COVID under control, which at some point they will, is that going to ramp up production? Well, not really, because if we don't have the consumer boom in North America and Europe yet, there's nobody to place those orders. That's one of the challenges you're seeing right now. You have a lot of major US importers right now that are basically not ordering any goods at all. You have some of them that have cut their volumes more than 50%. So if they're not ordering, all the Chinese could be healthy and go to work tomorrow, but there will be nothing for them to do.
Very good. Lars, our next question is from MBAC. Lars, what kind of capacity impact do you think CII will have with containers as pressure to sail slower reduces consumption?
Yeah, two things first. In the short term, CII is not going to have any impact. That's going to be from 25 and beyond. The one that's going to have impact here in 23 and 24 is the EEXI measurements they need to live up to. And this ranges from 0% to 10%, depending on who you trust out there. Some of the analysis that I've seen that seems most credible points towards 10%, but that's the full scope of 23 and 24. So you can then, if you at least want to extrapolate, say, fine, that's going to reduce fleet capacity by 5% this year, 5% next year. But keep in mind, we got an order book between 9 and 10%. So there's still going to be too much capacity coming on stream in 23 and 24. And that also means one way to think about the market is the container shipping market has always been cyclical. Basically, all shipping markets have always been cyclical for centuries. That's not going to change. And if we strip away all of the COVID disruption and everything else, what we're heading into now here is a regular, good old normal down cycle. We see more capacity injected because a lot of capacity was ordered the last couple of years. This is a normal down cycle that we're going to go into. And that structural down cycle is then going to bottom out late 23, early 24. That's basically also what I'm seeing in the market right now.
Okay. Kevin Bolger asks, how long do you think ILWU will continue to work without disruptions as their contract negotiations drag on over 6 months? And I guess maybe to rephrase that a little bit is, if the contract negotiations don't get resolved anytime soon, will people permanently decide not to come back?
It is a good question. I think there's a bit of an issue here because it would have been a heck of a lot easier to have signed a deal 6 months ago while it was still a boom market and especially the carriers were making money hands over fist. That didn't happen. Now you're in an environment where it's going to be very, very difficult for ends to meet. I don't have a timeline on how long they can stay on. My gut feeling tells me not very long. I would not expect to see an outright strike from one day to the next. What I expect to start to see unfold over the coming weeks and months is basically a replay of what you saw late 2014, early 2015, go slow actions. And it doesn't take very much to then create pressure and create new congestion issues. Remember back in 2015, I mean, I remember being there at the TPM conference where there were 40 ships lying off the coast. And back then, that was an unmitigated disaster. There was no really big strikes. It was the go slow actions. I expect to see the same thing unfold in the coming weeks and months if there is not a deal to be made soon. And it will be difficult to make a deal here because as I see it, and please, anybody here jump in if you see it differently, the main issue here is not money. The main issue is about what do we do or don't we do around automation. And this is where the terminals and the carriers are very much in a different corner than where the unions are.
Okay. I don't see anything more on the chat. Does anybody have any other questions that they would like to ask Lars? Do I have another? You can, okay, Matthew. Given the extreme rate volatility over the last 3 years after 15 years of relative stability and the presumed continued rate volatility as the larger order books and geopolitical situation work themselves. Okay, Todd, can you read that one? I'm having a problem reading on my screen.
Yeah, sure. Given the extreme rate volatility of the last 3 years, after 15 years of relative stability, and the presumably continued rate volatility as the large order books and geopolitical situation work themselves out, do you see carriers and shippers being more willing to embrace financial derivatives, FFAs, for container market to hedge their risks?
Several things on that one. First of all, if we were having this conversation at the end of 2019, I don't think anybody would have described the rates in the container market as being stable over the last 15 years. The only reason why they look stable now is because we got this massive spike over the last 3 years. That was an aberration. That one aside, will you see more embrace FFAs? I think that is a long time coming, because what we are seeing right now with full clarity as well is we still don't have a lot of enforceable contracts. There are some of them out there and they are slowly beginning to take up, but the vast majority of the contracts in the market are still the good old-fashioned ones where they're not enforceable from either side. And I find it difficult to see in a market where the majority of contracts are unenforceable from either side that there's going to be a large market for FFAs. You need the enforceable contract market to grow in size, and then the FFAs will follow.
Okay, thank you. From Peter Olney, how has Amazon impacted the industry? Have they acquired ships? Are they pondering a private dock strategy here in California to avoid the ILWU?
First of all, how has Amazon impacted the industry? From a carrier perspective, not very much. From a forwarder perspective, it's a different game. I see them basically as a large threat to the forwarders, but not to the carriers. And in expanding the question slightly, I would rather look at it this way. Anyone out there, either forwarders or BCOs that have chartered in ships over the last couple of years, you're going to see all of them stop doing it again. Quite a few of them burned their fingers badly trying to do it because it is a lot more complex and difficult than most people think to do in practice. And even if you are one of the lucky few ones that could actually pull this off and say, fine, we have our own ship, at least we can take our priority cargo, we can go into a smaller terminal, we can make it happen. Cost-wise, this is going to be a very bad deal now that the market is normalizing again. There was a short period of time for this, just like all these smaller opportunistic carriers that came into the Trans-Pacific. They made fantastic money in 21 and 22. And if they know what's good for them, they'll take the money and run and pull out of the market, or they will be forced to.
Very good. Do we have any last questions?
Yeah, there's another one from Lee. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
What do you think about ports and the FMC effort to increase container visibility in the supply chain, helping with congestion? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the flow initiative that is being hinted at here as well. It's been a while since I looked at the flow initiative, so I don't know exactly what the state of affairs is. I would rather turn around and say there is a need for that visibility. Now, whether that is best solved through the FMC initiative or through industry stakeholders coming together and doing it, I'm relatively indifferent. I think over time this will emerge. There will be much more transparency. It's just unclear right now under which auspices it's going to happen.
Okay. We still have time. One more question here. I think we still have time for one or two more questions. Anybody wants to ask or going once, going twice.
Hey, Stas, this is Ron. I was trying to type one, but I wasn't typing fast enough. So my question to Lars, because I know I'm going to be at an event coming up, and so I'm going to cheat a little bit, Lars, and get an answer from you. Because the question that I've gotten from a lot of exporters in particular is, what have we learned from this last 3 years that can help us prevent this from happening again? Is there some major lessons learned from this that we can start building on to make sure that we don't fall into this trap again?
One of the things that everybody should learn from the last few years is don't take access to capacity for granted. Don't treat your supply chain as if you are dealing with procurement of something that's always available. Resilience is more important than most people realized prior to the pandemic.
Okay. That's a good point. And one question that we haven't gone to, you alluded to it a little bit, I think. the prospect for US exporters in 2023, obviously the problems that they had with being unable to book have gone away. Should the exporters be, agricultural exporters be breathing a lot easier in 2023?
Definitely easier than what you had in 21 and 22. Problems with equipment are going to be resolved. Freight rates are coming down. They're not fighting against importers who are willing to pay $20,000 per FFE. All of those things are getting back to normal. The challenge for the exporters here is going to be dealing with all of these blank sailings, because keep in mind, when the import market has collapsed, carriers will cancel a lot of capacity. The decision to cancel sailings is purely based on the needs of the importers, and the exporters will then just have to take whatever capacity is in the market.
Very good. And I understand that you have been skiing in Azerbaijan, and
Yes.
The skiing was better than it was in Europe this year.
Absolutely.
Okay, and will you be at TPM this year?
Yes, I will. I'll be full-time. And for anybody who's there, I am having a presentation on the Wednesday morning. So drop by if you're at TPM.
Very good. Lars, I want to thank you very much. And I want to thank our participants all very much. This is a real education for us getting into the new year. A lot of different things are happening. Sometimes we forget in the shipping business that the more things change, the more they stay the same. We were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped. And now hopefully we're going to get back to some sort of normalcy in 2023. Lars Jensen, thank you again very much for all of your insights and all of your help. We at the Propeller Club are very grateful, and I want to thank our participants. We're going to have a very challenging year, I think, and a lot of you are going to be moving in a lot of different places. We hope for the best, and I hope that everybody does well this year, and that we will see you soon. We've got some presentations that we're planning for the rest of the year, but do not forget, if you can, the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference is at the end of February. And Lars, what day is the day that you're speaking?
Wednesday, March 1st.
Very good. Okay. And from the Propeller Club of Northern California, I wish you a good rest of the day, and I hope that we will see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Lars.